The hidden truth about Jehovah's Witnesses that nobody tells you. What if I told you that behind the carefully polished image of those well-dressed people knocking on your door lies a world of absolute control, shattered families, and covered-up secrets? Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that your entire family, your parents, siblings, even your own children, are forbidden from ever speaking to you again. For millions of former Jehovah's Witnesses, this isn't some dystopian nightmare, it's their daily reality. With over 8 million followers across 240 countries, Jehovah's Witnesses project an image of moral righteousness and devotion to God. But beneath this facade lies a complex web of rigid rules, psychological control, and devastating consequences for those who dare to question. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the shocking truths that Jehovah's Witnesses themselves aren't even allowed to research. Truths that explain why this seemingly harmless religious group has been investigated by governments worldwide and classified as an extremist organization in some countries. What actually happens behind closed doors of this enigmatic religious community? Why does their doctrine generate such fervor among followers while simultaneously causing profound trauma for those who leave? And most importantly, what makes this organization so effective at maintaining control over millions of people's lives? The answers might completely change how you view not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but the very nature of belief, community, and psychological influence itself. To truly understand the influence this organization wields, we need to first examine its origins. Jehovah's Witnesses emerged in the late 19th century under Charles Taze Russell, who established a Bible study group in Pennsylvania. But Russell wasn't just studying the Bible, he was convinced he had cracked a divine code hidden within its pages. Imagine the power that comes with believing you, and only you, have mathematically calculated the exact moment when God will destroy the world. This intoxicating certainty became the foundation that would eventually control millions of lives. From its inception, the movement distinguished itself from mainstream Christianity by rejecting core doctrines like the Trinity and eternal hellfire. After Russell's death, leadership passed to Joseph Franklin Rutherford, who transformed the loose Bible study movement into a highly organized religious institution. It was Rutherford who coined the name Jehovah's Witnesses in 1931, emphasizing their role as representatives of God, whose primary mission was to spread his message door to door. But what truly sets Jehovah's Witnesses apart is their unwavering belief in the imminent end of the world. For over a century, they've lived in constant anticipation of Armageddon, the final battle where God will destroy the wicked and establish paradise on earth. This apocalyptic worldview isn't just a theological concept, it's the beating heart of their entire belief system, dictating every aspect of followers' lives. The organization has repeatedly predicted specific dates for the end times: 1914, 1925, 1975. When these prophecies failed to materialize, rather than acknowledging their error, the governing body simply adjusted their interpretation. They claimed the predictions were partially fulfilled through invisible events, or that they had made a minor miscalculation. The predictions failed, again and again and again. Yet the message never changes. We are in the last days. The end is imminent. Armageddon could arrive at any moment. The 1914 prediction is particularly significant. Initially, witnesses believed this would mark the literal end of the world. When that didn't happen, the organization reinterpreted the date as the invisible beginning of Christ's presence, with the visible Armageddon still imminent. Picture growing up convinced that you'll never graduate high school because the world will end first. Imagine being told that planning for retirement is pointless because Armageddon will arrive long before you reach old age. This isn't hypothetical. It's the psychological reality for millions of Jehovah's Witnesses. One former member shared, "I remember sitting in my 8th grade classroom, absolutely certain that I would never need algebra because Armageddon would come before I grew up. My parents had been told the same thing when they were children. Now my own children would have been told the same if I hadn't left the organization and broken the cycle." This constant state of apocalyptic expectation creates a completely distorted relationship with time and future planning. Witnesses often live in a perpetual present, hesitant to invest in long-term goals or aspirations. Major life decisions, education, career, family planning, are all viewed through the lens of, how will this affect my standing when Armageddon comes? But now, let's slow down for a moment. To truly understand the psychological grip this organization maintains over its members, we need to examine something far more subtle than apocalyptic beliefs. Imagine the Jehovah's Witness organization as an elaborate fortress built around a single precious vault. Inside that vault lies the organization's most guarded treasure: absolute authority. The walls, guards, and security systems, disfellowshipping, surveillance, isolation, all protect one fundamental principle: questioning is forbidden. Like oxygen to a flame, independent thinking would instantly threaten the entire structure. The organization actively discourages higher education, warning that universities are breeding grounds for worldly thinking that could lead members astray. Instead, they promote basic education followed by full-time service to the organization. The consequence? Many witnesses find themselves trapped in low-paying jobs, financially dependent on the community, and unable to build careers outside the faith. In their official publications, the governing body regularly features stories of young witnesses who rejected college scholarships or promising career opportunities to pursue kingdom interests, their term for organizational activities. These individuals are held up as examples of proper prioritization and faith. You might think the educational restrictions are the most limiting aspect of being a witness, but that's just the surface layer. The real control penetrates much deeper into members' personal lives. At the pinnacle of the Jehovah's Witness organization sits the governing body, currently 8 men based in Warwick, New York. These men claim to be God's exclusive channel of communication on earth. Their interpretations of Scripture aren't merely suggestions, they're presented as divine mandates. To question them is to question God Himself. This authority extends into the most intimate aspects of followers' lives. The organization dictates what members can wear, what entertainment they can consume, who they can marry, and even what medical treatments they can accept. The dress code is particularly strict. Men giving talks must wear suits and ties. Women are required to wear modest dresses or skirts for all religious activities. Pants are discouraged or prohibited, depending on the local congregation. Beards are generally forbidden for men in positions of responsibility based on changing organizational policies rather than explicit biblical commands. Entertainment is heavily regulated. The organization publishes detailed guidelines about acceptable music, movies, video games, and literature. Horror films, entertainment featuring magic or the supernatural, and anything with explicit sexual content or excessive violence is forbidden. Members are encouraged to research media carefully before consuming it and to leave theaters or stop reading materials that unexpectedly contain objectionable content. Even something as personal as masturbation is monitored and condemned. Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to report their sins to elders, who may question them in explicit detail about sexual activities. For young people especially, This creates an environment of shame and fear around natural sexual development. Social relationships outside the organization are strongly discouraged. While witnesses may interact with non-members at work or school, deep friendships or romantic relationships with worldly people are forbidden. This isolation reinforces dependence on the community and limits exposure to alternative viewpoints. But here's where things take a shocking turn. Perhaps the most controversial of these rules is the prohibition against blood transfusions. Based on their interpretation of biblical passages like Leviticus 17:10-14, Jehovah's Witnesses refuse blood transfusions even in life-threatening situations. Parents have watched their children die rather than authorize a transfusion. Adults have signed medical directives refusing blood even when faced with preventable death. The organization maintains detailed records of these faithful deaths, often featuring them in publications as examples of spiritual victory and integrity. What goes unmentioned is the grief of families left behind, or the medical professionals traumatized by watching patients die from treatable conditions. While the organization promotes alternative bloodless treatments, the reality is that this doctrine has resulted in countless unnecessary deaths. In some countries, courts have intervened to authorize transfusions for minors against their parents' wishes, but adult witnesses continue to die from treatable conditions when alternatives to blood aren't available or effective. The policy has evolved somewhat over time. Initially, all blood products were forbidden. Gradually, the organization began allowing certain fractions of blood while continuing to prohibit whole blood and primary components. This inconsistency has led some members to question the biblical basis of the prohibition, noticing that the same scriptures used to forbid blood also forbid eating animal fat, a rule witnesses don't observe. Now imagine you've been raised in this community since birth. Everyone you know, your family, friends, your entire social network, are Jehovah's Witnesses. Your identity is completely intertwined with the organization. Then one day, you begin to have doubts. Perhaps you've discovered inconsistencies in their teachings. Maybe you've witnessed hypocrisy among the elders, or possibly, you simply want the freedom to make your own choices. What happens next will shatter your world. Now we reach the breaking point in this system of control. Imagine a form of punishment so psychologically devastating that it makes physical torture seem merciful by comparison. Like an architect designing the perfect prison, Jehovah's Witnesses have engineered disfellowshipping. Not just spiritual punishment, but the complete erasure of your existence from the only world you've ever known. When a member is disfellowshipped, either for violating rules or simply choosing to leave, they become persona non grata. All witnesses, including parents, children, and siblings, are required to shun them completely. The list of disfellowshipping offenses is extensive and includes celebrating holidays or birthdays, voting in political elections, having a blood transfusion, questioning organizational doctrine, smoking or drug use, premarital sex or sexual immorality, associating with disfellowshipped individuals, expressing disbelief in any aspect of the organization's teachings. This isn't a gentle distancing, it's a total social death. One former member described her experience. The day I was disfellowshipped, my mother looked me in the eyes and told me I was dead to her. She gave me 1 hour to pack my belongings and leave her house. I was 18 years old with nowhere to go. I haven't spoken to her in 15 years. Another recounted, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer shortly after I left the organization. Despite the severity of her condition, my parents, her grandparents, refused to visit her in the hospital or even call to check on her. They were following organizational directives to cut all ties with me, including my children. A particularly heartbreaking case involved an elderly woman who had been a devoted witness for over 50 years. After expressing doubts about changing organizational doctrine, she was disfellowshipped in her 70s. Her entire support network vanished overnight. Neighbors who had known her for decades crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. She died alone in a nursing home, her witness family refusing to visit even as she lay dying. The effects ripple through generations, and nobody outside the organization even notices. This practice of shunning isn't just emotionally devastating. Psychological experts have identified it as a form of extreme psychological manipulation. Dr. Marlene Winnell, a psychologist specializing in religious trauma, describes the practice as emotional blackmail on a massive scale. The trauma of shunning, she explains, can be equivalent to experiencing the death of all one's loved ones simultaneously, except that the shunned person must live with the knowledge that these individuals are choosing to treat them as dead. The threat of losing one's entire social network serves as a powerful deterrent against questioning or leaving the faith. Many members remain not out of genuine belief, but out of fear of losing everyone they love. The control extends even further through the organization's internal judicial system. When a witness is accused of wrongdoing, they face a judicial committee, typically 3 male elders who question them behind closed doors. No lawyers, no advocates, no transparency. The accused has no right to know their accuser, examine evidence, or appeal to an impartial authority. A former elder described the process. I sat on dozens of judicial committees during my 20 years as an elder. Looking back, I'm horrified by the power we wielded over people's lives. We were untrained men making life-altering decisions based on rigid interpretations of Scripture. The psychological damage we inflicted was incalculable. These committees wield extraordinary power. They can forgive or condemn, punish or pardon. Their decisions, supposedly guided by Scripture, are final and binding. This judicial system has come under intense scrutiny for its handling of abuse cases. The organization's 2-witness rule requires 2 eyewitnesses to establish wrongdoing. Imagine being 9 years old, traumatized and terrified, finally gathering the courage to tell someone you've been abused, only to be told that without a second witness, your suffering doesn't officially exist. This isn't fiction. It's the exact policy that has silenced countless victims within the organization. Since abuse typically occurs in private, victims often can't provide a second witness, leaving their abusers unpunished and potentially free to harm others. One survivor shared her experience. I was molested by an elder when I was 9 years old. When my parents reported it to the congregation, they were told that without a second witness, nothing could be done. Not only did my abuser remain in good standing, but my family was counseled not to report it to police because it would bring reproach on Jehovah's name. He went on to abuse at least 4 other children that I know of. Investigations in Australia, the UK, and the United States have uncovered thousands of abuse cases hidden in congregation records. The Australian Royal Commission found evidence of over 1,000 alleged abusers within the organisation, none of whom had been reported to police by congregation elders. The organization justifies this policy by claiming that matters should be handled internally based on biblical precedent. But in practice, this approach has created safe havens for predators and left countless victims without justice or protection. Beyond the abuse cases, there's the day-to-day surveillance that pervades witness communities. Members are encouraged to report on each other's sins, creating an atmosphere where everyone is potentially watching and judging everyone else. This constant monitoring extends to all aspects of life, from dress and grooming to social media activity. A former witness explained, you're never truly alone in your thoughts. Even in your most private moments, you're aware that you'll need to confess any sinful thoughts to the elders. You learn to police your own mind, to fear your own natural impulses and curiosities. It's exhausting and ultimately soul-crushing. Despite all this, Jehovah's Witnesses continue to present themselves as a model of moral purity. Their clean-cut appearance, emphasis on family values, and abstention from political involvement have helped them maintain a relatively positive public image in many communities. The door-to-door ministry they're famous for serves multiple purposes. Beyond recruiting new members, it reinforces organizational identity, strengthens commitment through shared sacrifice. Facing rejection repeatedly is difficult, and creates an us versus them mentality that further isolates members from the outside world. Picture this stunning contradiction. The organization born from questioning religious authority has transformed into the very monster it once fought against. Like a revolutionary who becomes the dictator he once opposed, this group that once championed critical examination now brands its own questioners as mentally diseased apostates. Russell himself, were he alive today, would likely be disfellowshipped by the machine he created. This disconnect between public perception and internal reality creates a profound cognitive dissonance for members. They're taught that their organization is God's chosen vehicle for salvation, yet they witness hypocrisy, injustice, and harm within its walls. Some manage to reconcile these contradictions through rationalization or compartmentalization. Others begin to question, entering a dangerous territory where doubt can lead to their complete social isolation. Children born into this system are like fish who've never left their aquarium. They have no concept that water isn't the only reality. From their first memories, witness children absorb a terrifying message. Everything beyond their glass walls is poisonous and deadly. The outside world isn't just different. It's dangerous, controlled by Satan himself, and marked for imminent destruction. Friendship with worldly children becomes as forbidden as touching a live electrical wire. A woman who grew up as a witness recalled, "Every day at school was a reminder that I was different, separated from Satan's world. When classmates invited me to birthday parties or Halloween events, I had to refuse. When they sang Christmas carols, I had to stand silently. When they pledged allegiance to the flag, I had to remain seated. I was constantly performing my difference, constantly reinforcing the boundary between me and them." This separate identity extends to language. Witnesses have their own terminology for virtually everything: meetings instead of services, kingdom hall instead of church, publishers instead of members, the truth instead of their religion. This distinct vocabulary further separates them from mainstream society and makes integration more difficult for those who leave. As these children grow older, they face mounting pressure to commit fully to the faith through baptism. Many are baptized as young as 10 or 11, before they've developed the critical thinking skills to truly evaluate their beliefs. Yet once baptized, they're held to the same standards as adults, meaning a teenager who questions the faith or breaks a rule can be disfellowshipped and completely cut off from their family. One man shared his experience. "I was baptized at 11, before I even understood what sex was. By 16, I was having normal teenage doubts and questions. When I confided these to an elder, I was brought before a judicial committee. They disfellowshipped me for apostasy, a term I didn't even understand at the time. My parents followed the rules and stopped speaking to me. I became homeless at 16 because of theological questions I had. How is that not abuse?" The psychological scars from this upbringing can last a lifetime. Former members frequently report symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and difficulty forming healthy relationships. The transition to life outside the organization can be overwhelming, as they must learn to navigate a world they've been taught to fear. One former member described it this way: "I was 35 when I left, and I felt like a child. I didn't know how to make friends outside the organization. I didn't understand cultural references or social norms. I had to learn how to exist in society from scratch, all while grieving the loss of my entire family and support system." Another challenge for former members is rebuilding a sense of morality and purpose outside the strict framework of the organization. Having been taught that all guidance comes from Jehovah through the governing body, many experience a moral vertigo when that structure is removed. "For months after leaving, I couldn't make the simplest decisions," one woman explained. "Should I watch this movie? Is it okay to date this person? Can I celebrate my birthday?" Everything triggered a wave of programmed guilt and fear. I had to consciously rebuild my entire value system from scratch. Beneath the surface of every exit story lies a moment, often tiny, seemingly insignificant, when a single question pierced the armor of certainty. It might come while sitting in a kingdom hall, or during personal Bible study, or after witnessing inconsistency from an elder. Suddenly a thought appears that shouldn't exist. What if this isn't right? That forbidden thought, that single spark, eventually ignites a chain reaction that can bring down the entire structure of belief. One former member described his awakening. "It started with the blood doctrine. My daughter needed surgery, and I began researching the medical aspects of bloodless alternatives. This led me to examine the biblical basis for the prohibition more carefully. Once I pulled that thread, the entire tapestry began to unravel. I realized I had accepted so many teachings without ever truly examining them." For many, these questions mark the beginning of a painful awakening. They realize that the truth they've dedicated their lives to may not be truthful after all. This realization triggers a profound identity crisis. Who are they if not Jehovah's Witnesses? What purpose does their life serve if not preparing for a paradise that may never come? The organization treats information like a medieval kingdom treated the plague. External knowledge is quarantined, condemned, and feared, a contagion that must be contained at all costs. While the rest of society celebrates the information age, witnesses are taught to view the internet as Satan's most sophisticated weapon, a vast repository of spiritual toxins designed to infect their minds. A current governing body member, Anthony Morris III, famously stated in a recorded talk, "The internet is a very dangerous place. Apostates are mentally diseased and trying to infect you with their disloyal teachings." This rhetoric equates questioning with mental illness and disloyalty, further stigmatizing the natural process of critical examination. Some leave abruptly, writing formal disassociation letters and accepting the immediate shunning that follows. Others fade away gradually, reducing their involvement until they're forgotten by all but their closest family members. Either way, the journey out is traumatic, leaving emotional wounds that can take years to heal. Yet many former members report that despite the pain, leaving was the most liberating decision of their lives. One man who spent 40 years in the organization shared, "For the first time, I can think for myself. I don't have to filter every thought through the lens of organizational approval. The mental freedom is worth every sacrifice I've had to make." This freedom comes at a steep price, though. Many lose not just their religious community, but their entire social identity. They must rebuild their lives from scratch, often without education, career prospects, or social connections outside the organization. The practical challenges are immense. Without higher education or career development, many former witnesses find themselves struggling financially. Without experience building relationships outside the organization, many struggle with loneliness and social anxiety. Without practice making independent decisions, many feel overwhelmed by the seemingly infinite choices of the outside world. Support groups have emerged worldwide to help former witnesses navigate this difficult transition. These communities provide practical assistance, emotional support, and a sense of belonging for those who have lost everything. Through these connections, many find the strength to create meaningful lives beyond the confines of the organization. One of the most powerful healing factors for former members is simply being believed. After years in an environment where their perceptions and experiences were constantly invalidated, having others acknowledge the reality of their trauma is profoundly validating. A former witness who now facilitates support groups explained, "When someone first joins our group, they're often shell-shocked. They'll say things like, 'I don't know if I'm crazy,' or 'maybe it wasn't really that bad.' Then they hear dozens of stories that mirror their own experience exactly, and you can see the relief wash over them. That moment of recognition, 'I'm not alone, I'm not crazy,' is the first step in healing." The growing accessibility of information through the internet has posed a significant challenge to the Jehovah's Witness leadership. Where once they could effectively control what information reached their members, now critical articles, personal testimonies, and historical records are just a search away. Leaked internal documents, recorded meetings, and first-hand accounts from former high-ranking members have exposed aspects of the organization that were previously hidden from rank-and-file witnesses. This transparency has accelerated the rate of departures, particularly among younger members who are more technologically savvy and less willing to accept restrictions on information. In response, the organization has intensified warnings against apostate material, their term for any criticism of the faith. Members are told that reading such content is dangerous, even satanic. Smartphones and internet access are heavily discouraged or monitored. Some kingdom halls, their places of worship, even ban phones or require they remain in cars during meetings. The official Watchtower publication has compared apostates to gangrenous tissue that must be removed to prevent infection, and to poisoners attempting to contaminate the spiritual food of faithful witnesses. This dehumanizing language creates a deep fear of former members and ensures that current witnesses will avoid any information they might share. Despite these efforts, an increasing number of witnesses are finding their way to information that challenges their beliefs. As one former elder put it, the internet didn't just crack open the door, it blew the whole thing off its hinges. The organization can't put that genie back in the bottle. The governing body has responded by doubling down on apocalyptic messaging, reminding members that the end is imminent and that those who remain faithful will be rewarded. Meanwhile, they've modernized their outreach methods, creating polished videos, a custom app, and a strong online presence to retain younger members. These videos, produced at their substantial headquarters in Warwick, New York, present an idealized version of witness life. Happy families, supportive communities, and simple solutions to complex problems. What they don't show is the despair of disfellowshipped individuals, the suffering of those denied medical treatment, or the struggles of those prohibited from pursuing their talents and aspirations. But for many observers, these efforts represent a losing battle against the tide of information. Former members predict that while the organization will survive, it may eventually contract to a smaller, more insular community of true believers. Legal challenges are mounting as well. In addition to the child abuse scandals mentioned earlier, the organization faces lawsuits related to their shunning practices, allegations of coercive control, and challenges to their tax-exempt status in various countries. In Belgium, the organization was found guilty of incitement to discrimination and hatred against former members due to their shunning policy. In Russia, the faith has been banned entirely, although many human rights organizations have criticized this as religious persecution. In the Netherlands, government funding was withdrawn following investigations into their handling of abuse cases. In the United States, where religious freedom protections are particularly strong, former members have struggled to find legal remedies for the harms they've experienced. However, increasing awareness of the psychological impact of shunning and growing recognition of coercive control as a form of abuse may eventually lead to new legal approaches. This raises important questions about the boundaries between religious freedom and harmful control. When does a religious group cross the line from a faith community to a high-control group? Should practices like shunning family members be protected as religious expression or recognized as psychological abuse? These questions have no easy answers, but they demand serious consideration from society at large. If you've watched this far, I'm sure you have quite a few questions about this organization. Let me answer the most common ones. Do Jehovah's Witnesses really believe only they will survive Armageddon? Absolutely. This is a fundamental teaching. According to their doctrine, only active baptized witnesses in good standing will survive God's judgment. Even inactive members or those who left peacefully are considered destined for destruction alongside the rest of humanity. This belief creates both a powerful sense of exceptionalism and a terrifying fear of leaving. How do they recruit new members if they're so isolated from society? Their primary recruitment method remains door-to-door preaching, but they've become increasingly sophisticated in their approach. Rather than immediate Bible studies, they often begin with non-threatening conversations about universal concerns, crime, illness, family problems, before introducing their literature as a solution. They specifically target vulnerable individuals, those recently bereaved, immigrants lacking social networks, and people experiencing personal crises. Why don't more members leave if the control is so extreme? The psychological barriers to leaving are immense. First, there's the fear of shunning and complete social isolation. Second, many lack the education, resources, or social connections to survive outside. Third, after years of indoctrination, many genuinely believe leaving means forfeiting eternal life. Finally, they're taught that negative feelings about the organization come from Satan himself, creating profound internal conflict about their own doubts. Is it true that Jehovah's Witnesses don't vote or serve in the military? Yes. Witnesses are taught to remain neutral in political affairs, meaning they don't vote, run for office, serve in the military, or even salute flags. This stance has led to persecution in countries with mandatory military service, where witnesses have been imprisoned for their refusal to serve. While they obey laws and pay taxes, they view themselves as citizens of God's kingdom rather than any earthly nation. How do they justify changing their teachings so often? The organization uses the concept of new light, the idea that God reveals truth progressively. Based on Proverbs 4:18, which describes light growing brighter until full day, they claim that adjustments in doctrine represent growing divine illumination rather than previous error. This framework allows them to reverse long-standing teachings while maintaining claims of divine guidance. What happens at their meetings and conventions? Witnesses typically attend multiple meetings each week at their kingdom halls. These include the public talk, a sermon by an elder, the Watchtower study, a guided discussion of a recent magazine article, and the Congregation Bible Study, examining current organizational publications. Larger conventions, held several times a year, feature baptisms, dramatic performances illustrating organizational teachings, and announcements of new publications or doctrinal changes. Do they really not celebrate any holidays or birthdays? Correct. Witnesses reject all holidays with pagan origins, including Christmas and Easter, all national holidays, including Independence Day, and birthdays, which they associate with paganism and pride. Children of witnesses don't receive birthday or Christmas presents, don't participate in holiday activities at school, and are taught to view these celebrations as displeasing to God. These questions only scratch the surface of this complex organization, whose impact extends far beyond its members to affect families, communities, and even legal systems worldwide. Now, looking at the global picture, we see Jehovah's Witnesses occupying a unique position in the religious landscape. They're neither a mainstream Christian denomination nor a small fringe group. With their distinctive beliefs, global presence, and high levels of commitment from members, they've created a religious identity entirely their own. In some countries, they've faced severe persecution. Russia has banned the organization entirely, labeling it extremist. In others, they've won significant legal battles, establishing religious freedom precedents that benefit all faiths. Their refusal to compromise on principles like political neutrality and blood transfusions has earned them both admiration for their conviction and criticism for its consequences. What's particularly striking about Jehovah's Witnesses is their adaptability. Despite maintaining a fundamentally apocalyptic worldview, the organization has survived for over a century, weathering failed prophecies, internal schisms, and external opposition. They've evolved from a small Bible study group to a global publishing empire with substantial real estate holdings and sophisticated media production capabilities. This adaptability extends to their proselytizing methods as well. While door-to-door ministry remains central to their identity, they've embraced digital outreach, establishing a strong online presence through their website, jw.org, and positioning themselves prominently in public spaces with literature carts in high-traffic areas. At the same time, they've maintained a remarkable consistency in core practices and beliefs. The prohibition on blood transfusions, political neutrality, and exclusive truth claims have remained stable despite significant societal changes. This consistency provides members with a sense of security and certainty in an increasingly complex and uncertain world. For many members, the organization offers genuine benefits: a global community, a structured lifestyle, and answers to existential questions. Witnesses are known for their strong work ethic, family focus, and abstention from harmful practices like excessive drinking and drug use. Many find deep meaning and purpose in their faith and ministry. A current witness shared, "My life has direction and purpose. I wake up every day knowing exactly who I am, what I believe, and why I'm here." In a world where so many people are lost and searching, that certainty is precious to me. What remains undeniable is the profound impact this organization has on those within its walls. For current members, it provides structure, purpose, and the promise of everlasting life. For former members, it represents both lost years and often a painful catalyst for personal growth and autonomy. As we conclude this exploration, it's worth considering: what defines a healthy religious community versus a harmful one? Is it the content of the beliefs themselves, or how those beliefs are enforced? Is it the freedom to join, or the freedom to leave without devastating consequences? These questions extend far beyond Jehovah's Witnesses to touch on fundamental issues of religious freedom, family bonds, and individual autonomy. In a world where information flows more freely than ever, high-control groups of all kinds face unprecedented challenges to their authority. How they respond, whether with greater openness or increased isolation, may determine their future relevance and impact. The story of Jehovah's Witnesses is in many ways a microcosm of larger societal tensions between community and individuality, between certainty and inquiry, between tradition and progress. By examining this organization closely, we gain insight not just into one religious group, but into the fundamental human needs that drive us to seek belonging, meaning, and truth. For those trapped inside systems of control, whether religious, political, or social, the possibility of freedom often begins with a simple yet revolutionary act: asking questions. In the words of one former witness who rebuilt her life after leaving, "The most dangerous question I ever asked wasn't, 'Is this wrong?' but 'What if I'm right to doubt?'" That courage to question, even in the face of devastating consequences, represents the indomitable human spirit that no organization, no matter how powerful, can ever fully suppress.